My daughter-in-law rose from her chair at the Easter table and told 11 people that I was a bitter, controlling old man who had been poisoning her marriage since the day it began. She said it in my dining room, in a house with my name on the deed, a house she had lived in rent-free for 3 years. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even stand right away. I set my fork down slowly, the way my father taught me, and I looked at my son, and I asked him one question. One quiet question that made the entire room go still. But before I tell you what that question was, and why it changed everything that came after, you need to know something first. Something I had never told a single living soul. Not my brother. Not my closest friend. Not even my own son. I had been carrying it for 3 years, folded inside a manila envelope at the bottom of my filing cabinet, buried under old tax records, hoping I would never have a reason to open it again. If you've already got a feeling about where this is going, hit that like button right now. Tell me your city in the comments. I read every one of them. Now let me take you back to where this really started. My name is Walter Greaves. I'm 59 years old, and I spent 29 years building custom homes around Ashcombe, just outside Columbus. I've poured concrete in January ice and framed roofs in 90-degree August air, and somewhere in all those years, I learned something most people never do. You find out exactly who a man is by watching how he treats the people who can't do anything for him. My wife Eleanor and I raised our son Nathaniel in the house we bought the year we got married. For bedrooms, a wide backyard, an old oak tree he broke his wrist falling out of when he was 8. Eleanor died 4 years ago, ovarian cancer. 9 weeks from diagnosis to the funeral. She was 55 years old, and some mornings, even now, my hand still reaches for a second coffee mug before I remember there's no one to pour it for. After she was gone, I threw myself into the one thing that still made sense to me, finishing a second property I'd been sitting on for years. A 3-bedroom house on Route 9, about 20 minutes from my place. I'd bought it years before Eleanor got sick, paid for it in full in cash. I gutted it myself over 2 summers, new kitchen, new bathrooms, hardwood floors laid board by board with my own hands. I always figured I'd rent it out someday. Then Eleanor got sick, and someday just stopped existing. The house sat there, quiet, waiting for a reason. It got one on a Friday evening in April, when my son called to tell me he'd met someone. Her name was Priscilla, and I had no idea yet what those 2 words, met someone, were about to cost me. Nathaniel's voice on that call had a brightness to it that men only get when they're trying hard not to sound as happy as they actually are. He'd met her at work. She did event coordination for a mid-sized firm downtown, sharp, organized, the kind of woman who walks into a room and has already quietly decided where everyone belongs in it. He brought her to the house 6 weeks later. She shook my hand, looked me dead in the eye, and said it was wonderful to finally meet me. I told myself that was a good sign. Every father tells himself that the first night. I made dinner. I asked questions. She answered every one of them with exactly the right amount of warmth, exactly the right amount of detail. Nathaniel watched her all evening like a man who'd rehearsed how the night should go and was relieved to see it running on schedule. They were engaged 14 months later. I got the news on a Sunday call, delivered the same way you'd mention a decent sale on groceries. Asterisk Priscilla's handling the wedding details, Dad. She's good at that, asterisk. She was. The wedding was at a vineyard outside the city in October. Everything matched. Everything ran exactly on time. I stood near the front and watched my son's face as she came down the aisle, and he looked like a man who'd just passed an exam he'd spent months dreading. 2 months after the wedding, I sat him down at my kitchen table and made an offer that would end up costing me more than I could have imagined. The house on Route 9 had been finished and empty for almost 2 years. I didn't want to watch them grind through their first years of marriage the way Eleanor and I once had, counting every dollar, resenting each other over things that couldn't wait. Live there, I told him. Asterisk no rent for now. Get your footing, asterisk. His eyes went red at the edges. He nodded because he couldn't quite get words out. I called Priscilla the next day to walk through the practical things. The water shut-off, the breaker panel, the reset button on the disposal. She thanked me, smooth and even, the way someone responds when they've already filed the information away and moved on to the next thing. I mentioned, just for the record, that the deed was still in my name. Of course, she said. And that was the last time either of us spoke of it out loud for 3 years. The house had been appraised the spring before at $310,000. I never brought that number up to either of them. My wife used to say that generosity, which announces itself, isn't generosity at all. I believed her then. I believe her even more now, because I didn't yet understand that not everyone in that house was operating from the same definition of the word. And the first crack didn't take long to show itself. The first year, I told myself I was imagining things. I'd always been the kind of father who dropped by on Sunday afternoons, unannounced, the way I had with my own father for 30 years. But Sundays at Route 9 kept turning into something else. Priscilla was always pleasant, always somehow in the middle of something. A client call, laundry that suddenly couldn't wait, a project she was coordinating for a friend. "You're welcome anytime," she told me once, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But a heads up is always appreciated. So I started calling ahead. Then the call started rolling to voicemail. Then I'd leave a message and sometimes hear back that same afternoon, and sometimes not until Tuesday. She never once called me Dad. I noticed it around month 4. She'd started calling my brother Dale and his wife by their first names within weeks of meeting them. Naturally, the way people do when they've decided they belong somewhere. But I was always Walter. Just Walter. The name sat between us like a small, cold formality that never once warmed into anything else. Nathaniel turned 34 that June. I was home on a Saturday when a photo landed in my feed, a backyard cookout at the house on Route 9. String lights, paper plates, 15 people easy. My brother had his arm around my son's shoulder in one shot, both of them laughing. I scrolled through the whole album twice. I wasn't in a single photograph, and there was no version of events where I'd simply been invited and forgot. Nathaniel texted the next morning, apologizing, saying he thought Priscilla had already reached out to me. I told him it looked like a great time. Then I set my phone face down on the counter and stood at the window for a long while, watching nothing in particular. He promised it wouldn't happen again. It happened 3 more times before the following Easter. When Priscilla got pregnant, I drove to the lumberyard myself and picked out the boards to build a changing table, solid pine, clean joinery, the exact same design I'd built for Nathaniel's own nursery, back when Eleanor was carrying him. I sanded it by hand. 2 coats of non-toxic finish. I delivered it in January and assembled it myself in the nursery, while my son handed me hardware and cracked jokes about instructions I never once opened. That was the best afternoon I'd had in almost 2 years. The baby came in late March. A boy. Nathaniel texted me at 10:42 at night. 4 words. Asterisk baby's here. We'll call, asterisk. I read that message 4 times, telling myself he was just exhausted, that new fathers don't communicate like normal people at 11 o'clock after a delivery. But the next morning, when I drove to the hospital and found the room, what I saw standing in that doorway was something I wasn't prepared for at all. And it was only the very first sign of exactly how far outside my own family I had already been quietly pushed. Priscilla's mother was already sitting in the chair by the window, holding my grandson, laughing softly at something only she found funny. The kind of quiet, satisfied laugh that belongs to someone who's already claimed the best seat in the room and knows it. Priscilla looked up when I knocked on the open door. They were still a little overwhelmed, she said. "Could I maybe come back this afternoon?" "Of course," I said. "I won't stay long." Nathaniel handed me the baby without waiting to be asked, and for that small thing, I was quietly grateful. My grandson weighed 7 pounds, 14 ounces. He had my son's chin, and he was fast asleep, entirely unconcerned with anything happening in that room, which struck me as the only sensible position available to anyone in it. I held him, and I counted the minutes. Not out of bitterness, just because I wanted to remember it accurately. 11 minutes. Then Priscilla's mother rose from her chair, not urgently, just with the practiced ease of a woman reclaiming what she considered hers. I handed the baby back to my son, put on my coat, and said I'd come by soon. Priscilla's mother stayed 10 days. I called every one of them. Sometimes someone picked up. They named him Miles. When Nathaniel called to tell me, I didn't say I'd already been thinking of him that way for a week. Some things you just carry quietly and let go. The rewriting of my own story started that September, 6 months after Miles was born. A woman I used to sit near at church caught me in the parking lot after service and tilted her head at me with the careful, rehearsed sympathy of someone about to deliver bad news gently. She'd heard I'd been having some difficulties with my son's family. That I could be, she paused to choose the word carefully, overwhelming. Overwhelming. I am a retired general contractor who is in bed most nights before 10 o'clock. I had not raised my voice at my son in anger a single time in his entire adult life. And I had spent 2.5 years quietly absorbing every single exclusion, without saying one word to anyone who might carry it back to him. Whatever version of me was circulating through that town was not the man driving home from church that Sunday morning. I gave it 4 days before I brought it to Nathaniel directly. I wasn't angry. I approached it the way I'd approach a problem on a job site, steady, looking only for facts. We sat on my back porch, and I asked him plainly whether he'd heard Priscilla describe me that way to people outside our family. He looked down at his hands. Asterisk, she doesn't mean it as an insult, Dad. You can just be a lot sometimes. Asterisk. Give me one specific time, I said. He couldn't. We sat there in the silence that followed, and that silence was its own answer. That evening, I walked to my filing cabinet without any plan in mind at all. My hand just went to the drawer, and what I pulled out of it that night was the first quiet piece of something I would not touch again for almost 2 more years. I took out the deed to the house on Route 9. My name on every line. The property address. The date of final payment, November, 2 months before Eleanor's first scan, before everything in my life reorganized itself around something I could not build my way out of. I read my own name on that paper, folded it once, and put it back in the drawer. I didn't think of it as a weapon. I thought of it the way you think of any fact you hope you'll never need, the kind that only becomes relevant if someone decides the agreed-upon reality isn't worth honoring anymore. About a year before that final Easter, Nathaniel called on a Saturday morning, and after a few minutes of small talk, he shifted the way he used to when he was 16 and needed something he wasn't sure he should ask for. He and Priscilla had been talking, he said. They wanted to start building some equity of their own. Was there any chance I'd consider selling them the house? Below market, obviously. Whose idea was it? I asked. The pause answered before his words did. It had come up between them, he said. But she'd brought it up first. I told him I needed time to think. 2 days later, I called an attorney I'd trusted for over a decade, a man named Foster Lang, who'd handled more property closings for my business than I could count, and who'd never once tried to complicate a situation beyond what it actually was. He confirmed exactly what I already suspected. No lease. No legal claim of any kind. Written notice was all it would take to end the arrangement entirely, whenever I decided to. I didn't tell Nathaniel about that call. I also didn't tell him what I'd already found sitting in my own bank statements. 8 months earlier, right around the time Miles was born, I'd quietly set up an automatic transfer, $450 a month, into the joint checking account Nathaniel had mentioned he and Priscilla opened together. Baby expenses, formula, diapers, whatever they needed. I didn't announce it. I didn't want it to feel like a performance. I just set it running and let it go. Then in September, I mentioned it to Nathaniel in passing, just checking that the deposits had been going through correctly. There was a pause. What deposits? He said. I described them. The amount, the timing, the account number. Dad, he said slowly, I don't recognize that account. I kept my voice level. I told him I'd look into it. Then I called my bank and asked them to trace the routing information on the receiving end myself. It took a few days to come back, and when it finally did, what I found waiting on the other end of that account was something so quietly deliberate, so carefully hidden in plain sight, that it would take everything I had left in me not to drive straight to that house and say something I couldn't take back. The account did carry Nathaniel's name, technically, but the online access, the linked debit card, and the mailing address on file belonged to someone else entirely. Priscilla's mother. Same last name. Same address, 2 towns over. Nearly $4,000 of my money, sent one careful transfer at a time, over 8 months, into an account my own son didn't even know existed, and every dollar of it routing straight back to a woman who'd held my grandson in a hospital chair before I ever got the chance. I sat with that fact for a long time before I did anything with it. I didn't call the bank again. I didn't confront anyone. I'd been in construction long enough to know something most people never learn. The moment you point at the cracked foundation is the moment the whole structure either gets fixed, or it comes down entirely. Timing matters just as much as the truth itself, maybe more. So I folded that information and put it away, next to the deed, and I waited. I declined Nathaniel's request to sell him the house on a Tuesday evening, a few weeks later. I kept it short. It's not the right time for me, no apology. No explanation. The invitation stopped the following week. Not with any announcement, just silence, settling in the way it always does when someone decides they no longer need to keep performing warmth. The Sunday calls from my son got shorter. The house on Route 9 went quiet for 10 weeks straight. I had no reason to drive out there anymore, because there was nothing left to drive out to. Miles was 9 months old by then, just starting to discover that other people's faces were the most fascinating things in any room, and I was missing every bit of it, week after week, in that particular way you miss something you can see the outline of but can't quite reach. Then in mid-March, Priscilla texted me. No greeting. Just, * you're welcome to join us for Easter. 2 o'clock. Bring something if you'd like, *. I read it twice. I wrote back 3 words. I'll be there. I meant every one of them, though almost certainly not in the way she expected. The week before Easter, my brother Dale called and told me what he'd already done without asking my permission, because he knew I would have told him not to. He'd called Priscilla directly, told her calmly that he'd watched me give that family everything I had and ask for nothing back, and that I did not deserve to become a stranger in my own grandson's life. What did she say? I asked him. * She said it was complicated, and that she'd appreciate it if I stayed out of family matters. *. I told Dale I was still going to Easter dinner. He didn't argue. What I didn't tell him was that Foster Lang was going to be sitting at that table too, and Priscilla had no idea she'd invited the one man in the world who already knew every single chapter of this story before she'd even finished setting it. Easter Sunday, I put on the gray blazer Eleanor had bought me for our 25th anniversary. She used to run her hand down the lapel and tell me it made me look like a man people took seriously. I hadn't worn it since her funeral. I put it on that morning, stood in front of the mirror for a long moment, and then went downstairs. I drove out to Route 9 slowly. The dogwoods along the road were in full bloom. I'd planted 2 of them in that backyard myself, the spring I finished the renovation, back when Nathaniel was 20, and we'd come home sunburned from a weekend of yard work, and sat on the back steps, not needing to say a word to make the silence feel good. 11 people were already inside when I arrived. Priscilla opened the door before I'd even knocked. Harold, glad you could, she caught herself. * Walter. Glad you could make it. *. The slight tilt of her head. The pleasant, practiced tone of someone welcoming a neighbor out of courtesy, not expecting to enjoy it. I handed her the bottle of wine I'd brought. She glanced at the label, set it on the entry table without another word, and turned back into the house. It smelled like roasting ham and cinnamon. 11 people crowded into a house built for 6 made it warm and close. Children's voices drifted down from somewhere upstairs. Dale found me near the kitchen doorway and put a hand on my shoulder without saying anything. His wife handed me a glass of water and gave me the look she'd been giving me for 30 years, the one that meant I see you, and I'm paying attention. Foster caught my eye from across the living room and gave me a small, quiet nod. He'd set his coffee mug down on the side table with the deliberate care of a man who had decided to be very still and very present. I looked away. I didn't need to coordinate anything with anyone. Miles was asleep in a portable crib in the corner, one fist curled under his chin, exactly the way he'd had it the very first morning I held him in that hospital room. I watched him breathe for a while. That was the best part of the entire afternoon. Priscilla ran the dinner the way she ran everything, seamlessly, moving between the kitchen and the table and 3 separate conversations without a visible seam, her mother seated to her right, passing dishes with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd been in that room long enough to feel a kind of ownership over it. The afternoon went well, which in that house was the same thing as uneventful. I ate everything on my plate. I asked no one for anything. The dishes were cleared around 5. Coats came off the backs of chairs. People settled into the living room with their drinks, and I was standing near the bookshelf, talking with Dale about nothing in particular, when I heard Priscilla's voice shift. It was subtle, the way a room changes the instant someone begins playing a different chord underneath everything else. And the second I heard it, I knew exactly what was coming next. "Must be nice," Priscilla said, loud enough to reach the whole room, though she was facing her friends. * To just show up for the holidays and not have to do any of the real work. * The angle of her body was deliberate. Someone nodded in sympathy. She refilled her wine glass, her voice going bright now, almost festive. * We don't get a lot of support from Nathaniel's side of the family. * She sighed, the measured weight of someone who'd been performing Patience for a long time and was finished performing it. * It all falls on us, really. * Dale's jaw tightened. He looked at me. I set my hand flat against the bookshelf beside me and kept it there. Priscilla set her glass down. She walked to the center of the room, to a spot where she could see everyone and everyone could see her. The rest of the room hadn't caught up yet to what was coming. But I had. She looked directly at me. And then she said it. Asterisk, you want to know the truth, Walter? You've been a miserable, controlling presence in our lives from the beginning. You've made Nathaniel feel guilty for building something of his own. You've never once made me feel welcome in this family. And honestly, I think everyone here has seen it. Asterisk. The room went completely silent. The kind of silence that follows a sound no one is entirely sure they actually heard. She stood there in the center of it, wine in hand, 3 years of accumulated certainty on her face, looking at me with the specific relief of a person who has been waiting a long time to say something out loud and has finally said it. I placed my glass down on the coffee table. The small, clean sound of glass touching wood was the only thing anyone heard. I stood up. Not fast. Not with any theater. The way a man stands when he has something to say and has finally decided the time for saying it has arrived. I straightened my jacket. Nathaniel, I said. I looked at my son. Asterisk. Do you know how much money I've been sending into that joint account of yours every month since Miles was born? Asterisk. He looked up. He shook his head slowly. Asterisk, $450 a month. 8 months. $3,600 total. I called the bank myself, son. That account carries your name, but the login access, the debit card, and the mailing address on file all belong to your mother-in-law's house. Asterisk. I let that sit for exactly 1 breath before I turned toward Priscilla. Asterisk. I don't believe you've ever seen a single dollar of that money. Asterisk. The room didn't move. Somewhere upstairs, a child's small feet crossed the floor, and that was the only sound left anywhere in the house. And I wasn't finished yet. And while we're here, I said, turning to look at Priscilla directly, asterisk this house. The one every single person in this room is standing inside right now. It is not Nathaniel's house. It is not your house. It has never been your house. My name has been on that deed since November of the year I paid it off in full. There is no lease between us. There is no agreement. There is only my generosity, which you just finished testing, in front of 11 people. Asterisk. Priscilla's mouth opened, then closed. Foster's head lowered slowly, the way a man nods when something he already knew has finally been spoken out loud in the right room, in front of the right people. Dale looked at Priscilla and said absolutely nothing. He didn't need to. Priscilla's mother had her eyes fixed on her own glass, wearing the expression of a woman realizing the story her daughter had been telling her for years might have been missing several important chapters. I didn't come here to fight, I said. Asterisk. But I will not stand in my own house and be told I've made myself unwelcome in it. Asterisk. I let that sit. Then I went to find my jacket. No one moved for a long moment. Then Nathaniel stood up, the first time all evening he'd risen, without being asked to help with something. He stood the way a man surfaces from underwater. Not surprised, exactly. Just coming up for air. Priscilla, he said, quiet and very careful. Asterisk. Did you know about the account? Asterisk. She turned toward him, and the certainty she'd carried into the center of that room had already begun reorganizing itself into something far more defensive. The money he sent, Nathaniel said. Did you know that wasn't? She started to answer. He waited. The whole room waited. One of her friends set down her wine glass and crossed her arms, the posture of someone quietly deciding they'd rather not be involved in whatever happened next. I picked up my jacket from the chair where I'd left it 2 hours earlier. Eleanor's blazer. I buttoned it 1 button at a time in that silence, and no one said a word while I did it. A jacket being buttoned in a silent room can carry more weight than people realize. At the door I stopped. Nathaniel was still standing in the middle of the room, wearing his mother's jawline and an expression I hadn't seen on his face in 3 years. Not anger, not embarrassment, recognition, the specific look of a person finally understanding something they should have understood a long time ago. Asterisk, call me when you're ready, son. Asterisk. I opened the front door. The April air came in cool and clean. I stepped out and closed it behind me softly, the way you close a door when you want someone to hear that there's no anger left in it. Just something finished. From inside, a moment later, I heard Miles begin to cry. The clear, solid cry of a baby waking up with no agenda at all. Just the simple announcement that he was there, and the world should probably know it. I walked to my car. And if you've ever said the thing you'd been holding on to for years, and then had to stand alone in the quiet that came right after it, tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. Now let me tell you what happened in the days that followed. Because what came next wasn't the ending anyone at that table expected. For days passed. No call from Nathaniel, no text. I didn't reach out either. I'd said what I needed to say. The next move wasn't mine to make, and sitting with that knowledge was about as comfortable as sitting with anything you're certain of but still uneasy about. I watered the plants on my back porch. Finished a book I'd been meaning to get through since December. Made a pot of soup from the recipe Eleanor had written on an index card I'd long since memorized, though I still set the card on the counter while I cooked, the way I always had. Dale called on the second day. Priscilla's mother had been busy. Calls to relatives on both sides. A version of Easter Sunday framed as an unprovoked attack on a daughter-in-law who'd done nothing but work herself to exhaustion hosting a holiday for 11 people. What did you tell people? I asked him. That I was there, Dale said, and that I have 2 working eyes. On the morning of the 4th day, there was a knock at my door. Nathaniel looked like he hadn't slept right since Sunday. He came in without a word, coat still on, needing a moment before he could speak. The same way he used to when he was 12 and something cruel had happened at lunch. He sat at the kitchen table, the one with the chip near the corner, where he'd hit it with a hammer at age 8 just to see what would happen. We never fixed it. It was just part of the table. I plugged in the kettle. I didn't ask him to explain himself. I've been thinking about a lot, Dad, he finally said. I don't know how I let it get to where it was. For the first time in 3 years, I told him the truth without softening it to protect him. The cookout I found out about through photographs. The 11 minutes at the hospital. The transfers he'd never seen a dollar of. He listened the way he used to when he was working through something hard, with concentration, not defense. Why didn't you say something sooner? He asked. Because I kept waiting for you to find your way back on your own. He nodded slowly. Dad, I'm sorry. I know, son. I know. A week later, I sent a lease through Foster. Market rate, 60 days to sign or make other arrangements. Priscilla's response came back scorched with accusations. I read it once and didn't reply. 10 days after that, Nathaniel called and told me they'd signed. He also told me something else. Priscilla had given him an ultimatum. Him or me. I told her no, he said. I told her you're my father, and I'm not cutting you out. I hadn't expected that. Or maybe I'd hoped for it so long I'd stopped letting myself. Nathaniel started bringing Miles over Saturday mornings, just the 2 of them, my grandson treating every low cabinet like a matter of genuine scientific importance. I put Eleanor's photograph back on the kitchen shelf, the one I'd quietly taken down years earlier without admitting why. People ask if I regret waiting 3 years to say anything. I don't have a clean answer. What I do know is this: staying quiet isn't the same as being weak. But there comes a point where silence stops protecting the people you love and starts protecting the people taking advantage of them. That point, for me, was a dining room I built with my own 2 hands. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe. There's another one waiting for you, same kind of quiet that eventually runs out of room. Thank you for being here with me.